Okay, this time we're going to get into lesson 6, and lesson 6 happens to have 3 different files in it. Pretty good little lesson because this one's going to talk more about how to edit and manipulate photos. So, for example, if you have a photograph that you've taken, you need to modify it. Let's actually get to the start file. It'll make a little more sense here. So the start file is similar to what happened a lot of times when we used to scan a lot of photos. So you probably won't have to do this first technique, but the rest of the product will be pretty good because it'll show you how to basically clone out different objects, how to do a couple different things to modify the basic look of it. So when people think of Photoshop, this particular lesson is a lot of the things they think about when they think of Photoshop as far as editing and manipulating photos. So we'll show you a couple techniques that can help you make your photographs turn out better. And so in this case, I guess the first thing we have to do is you can kind of tell when they scan this picture in, they must have the scanner, the picture on the scanner sideways, and it came in a little bit awkward. We have our crop tool, which we learned in lesson 2, that will help us kind of organize and straighten this thing up a little bit. So I'll just use the crop tool to make a general selection. And the part that I didn't catch on to about Photoshop or about the crop tool itself for a long time was you can rotate this crop tool. So the crop tool does let you rotate it and try to match it up the best you can with that particular, the kind of the misplacement that they did on the scanner. So we can hopefully crop out all this black area in the background and be left with just our photograph. So it's kind of similar to what we did with the potato head as far as cropping out something, but we didn't have to rotate it. So that was the only really big difference. But once you hit return, it should chop out all the extras that are left over there, all that black stuff that was on there, and we'll be left with a traditional type of photograph. Let me go ahead and save this like I would recommend you guys do. Anytime you do something that you like, I would save it. There's no magic number time-wise on how often you save stuff, but I would say it's a better route to go would be to, just whenever you do a step that you like, save it into your folder, and then you don't have to worry about the computer crashing or something happening along the way. Okay, so we got that first one knocked out. All right, so the very first thing we're going to try to do here is, let's go ahead and jump to my favorite tool. My favorite thing to do on this particular lesson is there's a boat right in the center of this photo. So here's our, zoomed in too far. Oh, there it is. You can barely see it when it's all pixelated once we get in there. What we're going to try to do is we're going to eliminate that boat, and we don't really have to be zoomed in that far. Let me try another view of this. Not quite so zoomed in there. Maybe about like that. Might be fair. Okay, so our goal is to introduce a new tool called the clone stamp tool. I've seen it called in other programs rubber stamp and other things like that. This one is going to basically clone this out. So basically the idea is to go ahead and take a sample of something in your background that can be a texture or pattern that we can then paint with to copy over the offending object. So our boat is what we want to get rid of here, and we're going to use this watery texture, which works great to take a sample of that, and then we'll paint over it. So let me go ahead and demonstrate that real fast for you. The one thing you can't see on the screen recording is I have to hold the Option key and then left click on my mouse button to take a sample of that particular part of my screen. So now when I go to paint, in this new Photoshop, it's actually going to give you a little preview. Even before I push down with my mouse button, you can kind of see what it's going to start to do. It's going to paint with part of my little watery background over my boat. And this one also has an opacity slider, so just like in most of our brush-based tools, you don't have to just click in one shot and wipe it out. The other thing you're going to notice too, as you start to paint, there's going to be a little plus sign that shows you the relationship between where you're painting and what you're painting from, or what you're kind of copying. So I can go ahead and click a few more times, but occasionally you might have to take another sample, and that way you don't end up getting some kind of repetitive patterns in there that you can kind of notice. But it's pretty common to be able to just eyedrop something, not eyedrop, but take the clone tool, take a sample, and be able to paint over something pretty easily. Now you can also use it for other fun kind of silly stuff if you want to. Let me take a sample of this little pole that we have here. So if I wanted to basically paint with something that's already on my screen, it's kind of a fun way to kind of duplicate stuff. I don't think it's probably a technique you would use very often, but this does kind of show you, if you can follow the little cursor on my screen, there's a little tiny one. It's kind of hard to see on the screen, but there's a plus sign that shows you what it's taking the sample from, and you can see what it's painting with. So kind of a fun one, maybe not too common to do that, but probably my favorite tool out of that bunch. Okay, let's zoom out here and see what else we got on this lesson. All right, next thing let's talk about is, you know what I probably should have started with is, a lot of times when you first get a photograph in, it may have all kinds of color variations and things you can't quite pick on. Maybe it's just a little bit, the image looks a little fuzzy or muddy, or not quite as bright and sharp as it could. There is lots and lots of image adjustment tools that you can learn with in Photoshop. I'm going to show you one called Levels. It's probably out of these top 5 or 6 here. these ones that can do some pretty major changes to the color balance and the way the pixels are presented. I think this is one you might want to choose, especially with digital cameras these days. But let's check it out and I'll show you what it kind of does. So I'm going to go to Image Adjustment and then Levels. And then this guy is going to bring up this little histogram basically. And the way I kind of interpret this is sometimes the stuff that's in their file, it's just not quite clean enough or perfect enough, and it kind of just muddies things up. So if you can take these little triangles and move them towards the base of their mountains, so there's kind of a mountain here on the left-hand side, and there's also kind of a mountain that starts on the right-hand side. If you can get these little sliders to right at the base of that mountain, then there seems to be enough good color information in there that it kind of eliminates some of that fuzziness or whitewash or kind of a haziness. So you might not have noticed without this, but let me undo the preview and I can click it. And it may be hard on a little movies to watch and see this noticeable, but there's a pretty significant difference in how clean it made that photo. So that is probably one of my favorite things. And pretty much every photo that you take a digital camera with, or use a digital camera to take the picture with, odds are you could probably come back and do that one idea and enhance the picture quite a bit. So that was again under Image Adjustments, and then that one was Levels. And it's that little histogram. You'll see you can slide that around and kind of clean it up. So a pretty good one to kind of work with. Okay, now there's another idea that's pretty similar to that idea, except what we did there, it actually made an adjustment to the entire layer. So whatever the adjustment we made occurred onto this layer, and all these pixels have now been transformed and changed. Another route that is a pretty good route to go is you can add what are called adjustment layers. So we're going to basically do a similar kind of idea. We're going to make an adjustment to it, but this time instead of using image adjustments, we're going to slide over to layer, and we're going to make what's called an adjustment layer. So this thing is going to end up building us a brand new layer that you can then have separate from the original one. So let me keep going through the process of demonstrating this, and it should make pretty good sense. We're going to try this one called color balance. And basically what it'll do, it'll let you name this layer that it's about to build here. And here's what it is actually given us. It's given us this new type of layer, which is not going to alter or hurt the original background layer, but it gives us an alternate way to make changes and try things out. And in this case, we're going to try to shift the color balance. And on this one, it would be very hard to notice, unless you had a professionally trained eye, but there is a little bit of kind of a reddish tone to this whole file. And if you look at our little sliders we have to play with, if we take things away from the red type of colors more towards the the bluish thing, you might notice that. But when we first started, you may not have picked up on it at all. But once we make this adjustment, you should notice that as we drop away from the red, say we try like a -12 or so, you should see a pretty big shift in color. If I turn that layer on or off, you can kind of see it's a little bit easier to pick up if you toggle on or off with the eyeball there. But that whole adjustment layer doesn't really affect the background layer unless it's turned on. And with it not on, it doesn't do anything to so it's kind of an independent idea. So it's pretty cool. The other one too, I think on this one, we used to do this lesson, I think we bumped this one up towards a little bit away from the red side and maybe to like a +8 on there. But again, I'm pretty sure those are numbers like getting away from the red side. Magenta is kind of a red color too, and then you slide away from that towards the green. It does improve this image quite a bit. Again, it's kind of hard to tell what happened, but when you turn it on and off, then you can kind of see it. But people that do stuff professionally have a very trained eye, and they can kind of pick up on these things better than probably you and I can. Okay, so that's a pretty good one. Let's show you another technique that you can definitely use in this one, and I'm going to try to replace the colors of this tart. So this one's kind of a tricky one. The common mistake that I make when I teach this lesson, and kids make when they do this lesson, is not switching back to the background layer. So I'm going to try to alter this actual orange that's on this particular layer. So to affect that layer, I got to get to it. So I'll switch to that layer, and initially I'm just going to isolate just part of this thing, and then I'm going to switch over to a different tool. So the regular marquee tool will just kind of make it so we can start dealing with this little, this quarter of the page. So just make a general selection of that area, and then we're going to use another adjustment. So you're going to find one that says Image Adjustments, and then we're going to find one that says Replace Color here. There's Replace Color. So once you find that one, pick it, and then here's the process. You're basically given like an eyedropper tool that'll let you take a sample out of your file, and that's the color that we want to affect or change. So in our example here, we're going to try to target this kind of orange that's on this tart. So with the first click, we got a pretty good chunk of it. This one uses a term called fuzziness, which is kind of like tolerance, from what we have learned in the Magic Wand tool. So it's pretty close. But even as I adjust this up, I probably am not going to get the entire thing kind of highlighted. What we're hoping to see in this little view is a pretty good solid mask or outline view of that, this object we're trying to change the color of. So this tarp is looks like it's kind of a triangle-y look here, and another piece down below. So at this point, that's probably as far as I'm going to get. I'm going to switch over to a little eyedropper with a plus sign next to it, and that's going to let me add to my color values here. And so there's a couple of little tones that are a little bit darker, or maybe even a little bit lighter, that can help me kind of isolate just that part of this image. So it should look pretty close to that when you get a pretty good selection made. And now you got multiple ways to change the color. When you're talking color, hue is what they typically call just a color value. So you could move this little slider if you wanted to. You could change how much of that color is applied to it. So kind of the saturation concept is kind of how I relate to that one. And then lightness or darkness is, how close is it related to black or how close is it related to white. And then another way you can do too is just click on the little result and you can pick whatever color you want it to be, which might even be a faster, better way to get exactly what you want. But it's pretty fun to try out. And then this is a great way to change the color of somebody's t-shirt or their eye color. But the benefit of doing it this way is you haven't altered all those kind of grayscales that are in the background that give it that little bit of texturing to it. So all you've done is kind of change the main color. So that's another one of my favorite ideas for this project. On this particular lesson, I think you're going to try to make it a purple, but I'll go ahead and leave that as that green for now, so I can keep moving to the next project idea, lesson idea. So let me deselect. Command D is the shortcut for deselecting. And then I think we only got really one more idea that's actually two more ideas that are worthy of a quick, brief discussion. One that I like and one that's pretty solid, but we'll probably not use too often until the end of the semester. So let me zoom in there. You'll notice on this little tarp, this kind of striped red and white tarp that goes across. Our goal on this one is we want to make these kind of dark reds a little bit brighter and sharper. This is kind of an idea that kind of relates to if you're working for a magazine and you have to do a product ad, say for a pizza or a tomato-based product, and that tomato is supposed to be the best-looking tomato ever. Well, this kind of dark ugliness color isn't really going to work for that. So we can do a couple things that are going to allow us to modify that. So we have a tool called the sponge tool, and that's going to have two options. Kind of a weird name for that tool, but you have desaturate versus saturate. So in this case, let's start with saturate. Let's go that route first. Saturate kind of means to intensify. So we talked about saturation just briefly a second ago when we were in that color balance idea. I'm going to change this particular brush down to a decent size, and then I'll just make a couple clicks in here and kind of show you what's happening. So saturate is going to intensify a color. So we have those kind of darker, dirty reds. As I click on with my sponge set to saturate, you're going to see these reds are going to get a little bit cleaner and more towards a pure red color. Now if you go too far, it'll kind of what I call overcook it, and you can end up getting it kind of looking very neon looking. So let's show you the opposite version of that, which is desaturate. Desaturate is kind of to intensify those colors and eventually take it down to more like a grayscale. So another option you could do for fun projects, if you ever wanted to take all the color out of some area but not make the entire thing black and white, that's pretty much what this thing does. So if I click a few times here, you can kind of see I just basically have taken all the color out of that particular layer. The color information is still on the file, so we can always go back in and saturate it again, and Photoshop is smart enough to know how to put those colors back in there. But it's a pretty good technique for just kind of making the colors look cleaner and brighter and stronger, and also just to kind of take out the color and make it more go towards like a grayscale. Okay, one last technique, and I think we better wrap it up. That's a lot to digest in one video. So let me try one more idea. For this last idea, our goal is, let me show you the end file. We're going to try to replace this boring gray sky that we had in our background with this kind of nice cloudy blue sky. So we have a couple things we got to do on that one. I guess number one, let's go get the clouds, because we need this little cloud thing, and there was a separate file called clouds. So let's just select that entire file and then copy it so it's in our computer's clipboard or memory bank. All right, so I got that part copied. On my file now, our job is to get that background gray and replace it. So let me try that idea. Well, it's all gray, right? So we can magic wand a big chunk. Make sure you're on the right layer, of course. I'm going to hold that shift key and grab another big chunk, a third big chunk, and then one little skinny sliver over here. But now I've got all that area selected, we're going to use a different kind of paste command. And this is the part that's a little bit awkward on this part, but under edit, we've typically gone to edit paste. This time, we've already made this selection, so we're going to use a tool called paste into that'll paste that piece into that one area. So it's still okay to move that sky around. You can even change the scale of it and do other options you